Do. Cool. All right, now we're recording. That toolbar just sometimes comes, sometimes goes. Thanks for reminding me to record. Cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about the lifecycle methods, and there aren't that many to think about. We've already used two of them. You've already used the constructor. Oh, I shouldn't have clicked on that. Sorry. Go back. You can click on these when you have a look. We've already been using the constructor function in our component, and we've also used the render method. So if you think back to the Chameleon components that we were building, or the to-do list components, think that had a constructor function. This is a function that is part of the lifecycle methods, and these are sort of like essentially key methods that you can use to hook into different parts of when the component appears on the page or sometimes disappears from the page. So if you think think to everyone did the Rails project, right? During the course, there were maybe like hooks that you were using when information got sent to a URL, and that you could say before like it hit the controller action, do this thing, or maybe after it, then do this thing. And so essentially there are phases that happen. And so you can see the three phases here: when it mounts, or when it updates, or when it unmounts. So when it essentially appears on the page, when the state changes, or when it disappears from the page. And there are things that happen at these things point, and so we can hook into each of these phases and say do a thing. And the reason why this is going to be useful to us is because we can say when the component appears, make a request to the API. So then you can just render your component, and it'll automatically go and get the information that's needed. We've been doing a bunch of updating already where we use set state, but we haven't needed to hook into that to do other things. And then when it disappears from the page, you can also trigger more events. But we're not going to worry about anything else apart from just using this lifecycle method here, component did mount, just to say when the component appears on the page, make a request. You can have a look at more uncommon ones by ticking this box, but I wouldn't worry about it for the moment. I would just focus on these three things here. And for today's session, we're just going to be worrying about component did mount. And that's really kind of the main one probably for this module that you will use. If you want things to disappear, you'll probably will use will unmount. But definitely have a play, but we're only going to focus on this one here. So, and the reason why we're using this one is because we want to automatically make a request. When it appears on the page, make the request. You might have done something similar to this using event listeners when you're using just simple JavaScript in the Notes app in what would be like further JavaScript week 7 on the course. If you might remember, you would add a window, an event listener to when the page loads, then do some things. And this is a little bit something similar. So we're looking for events, and this event in particular is like when the component renders. Then we can trigger things. Cool. Okay, so we'll actually apply this, so we'll see how it works. All we need to do is, like the constructor function we have in our component, we write a component did mount method, and we ask it to do some things. I think I added this resource in here as well. Why? Maybe this is just for you to be able to read more about. Yes, feel free to, this is more sort of reading if you want to have a read of this. But I'll leave that one diagram up here. Okay, so let's try and put this into action. The coach will demonstrate building a component that requests data from an API. Okay, as I was thinking about it this morning, I thought it might be fun to use the new summary API that you might have already worked with during week 7. Let's go to not part-time course. let's look up the news summary challenge. Let's see how this API works. No, but I don't care about this. I don't care about this. Okay, so let's have a look. What I want to do is let me maybe draw it out. Let me draw it out so we can all have a look at what I'm thinking about when we talk about it. So. Let's imagine this side is the API and this side is our app. At some point, I want a component to show up on the page. And when it shows up on the page, it's going to make a request from API and come back with some information. And for this example, I want to use the news summary API. And so in order to sort of understand how this works, rather than writing a React at the moment, I just want to play around with the API and see what happens when I make various calls, like how do I make a request and so forth. And so there's information here. So rather than just the app, I'm going to just be like on my command line, just use curl and just like make some requests and see how it works. Base double test of the CTV rate limit. Okay, so we'll have to do that as well. I'm not sure what the rate limit is on this example, but I imagine if we were to all of us send loads of requests, we could hit the limit and none of us will be able to do anything. So we'll have to find a way to stop our tests as well. If you want to get the content of an article from the Guardian API, this is the curl request you might make. And so let's just whack this in and see. No, I don't want to use it directly from the Guardian. I want to use it from the news summary API. Going to the Guardian with a query of API request URL. Boom. Okay. How does, hold on, before I go any further, how does this work? Okay, I can't do it like that. That makes sense. Let's just put the whole thing in here and see what happens. Let me make it sort of bigger. Easier to see. Okay, so I've just copied making curl request to this very long URL, which essentially says go to the makers API, which looks like it has all the information to authenticate, go to the Guardian route, and then send with it a request to this URL. Okay, so something happened. It looks like this is, I can't really read this very well, so hold on, let me just grab it all. And I'm gonna go to, I'm in the workshop app, which we did a comedian app and we did a dice roll. So I guess let me, as I'm doing this, create a folder for news summary, maybe. That's the folder that we'll work in. Let's create, I'm going to try and store this response somewhere. So let's store this, I guess, in our mocks folder. No, that's not a folder. No. And here, let's call this Guardian response, just for a moment. Okay, and then I want to cool. So this is what the response looks like. It comes back with a response key, and all of that has information. And that's the article. So I feel like that is a little bit more readable. Okay, so I can make a request. How does it even work? The Guardian, let's have a quick look. Guardian content API. Content search. Okay, so I could actually do it like that. So maybe rather than just look up a simple what I want to do, if I'm looking at a new summary, maybe I'll just get all the headlines. I'll search for a topic. What's a topic that we all want to know more about? Oh, search. And I'll go something like query equals. Maybe let's have a look about all the headlines about the coronavirus. Do that. It's all spiking at the moment, huh? Okay. Let's have a look at what that is. So at the moment, I'm just playing around, having a look at all this information, and let's have a look at what it looks like. Okay, so I have results. I have loads of results, but it only gives me the first, 10, and each of the results has a URL and a title. Cool, all right. So I think that is something. And I guess what I want to do, now that I've understood how to grab a bunch of headlines, a bunch of items like news stories, is, so we're going to go and have a look at the sort of search resource, and we use a way to like with a query, I think it's something like this, right? And then we had coronavirus like this, something like that. Yeah, your search term. And the response here is a bunch of items. So I guess in my app, all I want to do is like see a load of, like in a list, a load of headlines. And maybe let's have them all as links that we can click on, and each of the links therefore needs to have like a URL and also a title. Keep it very simple. One component that just makes a request, gets this information, passes it, and then displays the URLs and the titles. Yeah? So far, so good. I know I've just been doing a bunch of exploration, but just give me a quick thumbs up if you understand the premise of what I want to do. Yeah. Any questions at the moment about things I've said or talked about? I'm sure there might be a few, so feel free to like jump in and be like, why are you thinking about doing it this way, or why not do it that way? Okay. Again, just shout out if you want to. No need to keep yourself on mute. I won't be looking at the chat, so just shout it out if you want. Okay, so this is the way I'm thinking about it. Make a request. So at the moment, I've just been using curl to sort of like play around with the API, see how it works. It feels quite straightforward at the moment. There's a big long thing here, but I'm not going to worry about splitting this up at the moment. I just want to see how it works. So I've got an example response, and I've already sort of stored it here. And I guess what would be fun to see is if I like change this web title and say something like, I am a test response. Clearly this is only going to exist in my project. At some point I want to replace the response I get from the API with this file here. And so I'll probably do an assertion that says like, I will see this on the page. And that will mean I've successfully mocked it. So then I need to write my test now. So I have an idea of what I want to do. I want to see a list of links. Let's write a test. So headlines. Okay, so what I want to do I guess the first stage is make sure I have React in here. And before I go even further with imports, let me just try and think about what I want it to do. So test shows headlines. Cool, not think too much more about it. As a result, I need to think about importing render screen. And given that I'm working, I feel like I'll leave it there for a moment. I think I'm going to need more than this. Excuse me. And this comes from testing library. React. I need to import my source code, so that comes from import, I guess, headlines from headlines. And I guess the first thing you want to do is going to be render headlines. Then when I render it, it's going to show all the information there. So then I want to do something like screen.get by text, and what I guess I'll be using just the titles to show up on as links, and when I click through, there'll be like a link to each of the URLs. I think the only thing that I want from each of these items at the moment will just be the web title and the web URL. So this is what I want to see. So I want to grab that. Store it there, get the text, and then I'm going to expect that element to be in the. Okay, so I think there's going to be a couple of things I need to do to make sure this test works. One is I need to make sure that I don't find the text before it finishes, it resolves the API request. I think there's two things I need to do. I need to tell Jess that this is going to be an asynchronous test. And the thing I need to await is this part here. And I might need something more from this, but let's stay there for the moment. I'm not going to worry about mocking it for the moment, but I guess at some point I'm going to mock the response JSON, which is really going to be, how do I get the response JSON? I'll be using fetch, which is a web API for the browser that makes requests, and return the response JSON. That's what I'll do in a sec. I'll do it a little bit later, but I just wanted to get this test sort of like running first, and then build out my component, and then I think this will be the last stage that I'll do. So let's see what errors happen when I try to run my test. Which will be a bunch of errors. Let's run all of them. It takes a while to run, but clearly it's going to be a lot of errors. One failed, one passed. I assume the one that passed is from this one, which just asserts that the headers there. Yeah, of course, we can ignore that one. And the one that failed is because it can't find the module. Yeah, fair enough. I have errors there. So let's write it. Headlines.js. Let's just see what happens. I actually need to write the module. I'm sure nothing's changed. So it should tell me here. Yeah, okay, let's export it. So let's actually write our module. So I need to import React, and it's going to be a class because it's going to update its state. So I have to get the component from React. I think that's all I need. So class headlines extends component, and this we use a constructor function like this. And then what do I want in it? So it's going to start off with an empty array of items, and then it makes the request or updated state to have a list of news items from the API. So I guess we'll start off with state, where this will be a bunch of items, but empty to begin with. So I want to be able to display them. It's going to loop through all the items. I'm going to write my render function first and come back and write my component did mount method. So what I want this to do, this is going to loop through this .state items, and it's going to look at each item and give me back something. So I need to, what I want to do, I think I'll wrap this in a div, just have safe practice. And I'll do something there in a second. So this is the thing that gets returned. We'll return a div that has nested inside of it. Let's just give this a name so I can read it easily. This is going to be the headlines. And inside of this div, I'm going to list out a bunch of what I say it's going to be links with a URL and a title. Okay. So I need an anchor link. And each anchor link has an href, which I don't really know what this is yet. It's going to come from the item, something from the item. And the text is also going to be something from the item. I don't know what it's going to be yet. I need to have a look at it. I guess I can have a look at it. If each of these items here, in order to get, it's going to be called web title and URL, right? I can actually just whack it in there. This will be the web title, and this will be the web URL. Yeah, fair enough. Anchor links aren't lock units, so let's wrap them each in a paragraph. Paragraph that has a link and has those two things. All right, I'm not thinking too much more about it for the moment. I'm going to come back to it. We need to figure out where the items comes from. So here is when I'm going to write my component did mount method. And at some point I need to be calling this.setState with items. And I need to figure out what goes in here. So that's what I want to do. And I also need to make sure I make a fetch request. So I use fetch, and fetch takes a URL. So that's how I do it here. Let's see. Oh, I can't go back. I'll put straight to find out. Yes, I can. I want this one. So okay, that's a long URL. Okay, that's fine then. Fetch, new summary, guardian, API request URL. to the content regarding API with the search term coronavirus. Fine. What comes back is usually a promise. I have to then chain then, and when it does something, I need to pass it. So it's usually in JSON. I turn it into something that's readable. So let's go response, and then go response.json, and then I actually need to like manipulate it. So after the past stuff, I can then, whatever data has come back, I can then do this thing, where this is going to be the data. I guess we go back here, the data comes back as this whole object. So I go response to get into this object, and then results to get into the array. Response, results. Double check, response, results, plural. Response, results, and that will be the array. Okay, so fetch, parse it, and then take the parse stuff and set state. That's all I think I want this to do. Set state, and it will re-render and loop through the items and print everything out. Okay, I'll run it in a second, but let's see what failures are in my test. Maybe it takes a while. Have I imported it? I haven't imported it. Jesus, I always forget it. Export, default, headlines. Let's try to run again, I think. Unable to find an element with the text I am a test response. Cool, this is exactly what I want. So at the moment I haven't mocked it, so it's getting the real headlines, but let's double check and make sure that's happening. So let's have a look here. It might just not even be there, so we'll see. Let's have a look here first. Cool, so I haven't actually successfully awaited it yet. So at the moment, it's just there's nothing being inserted into this div. So I think I need to add in something from React Testing Library, say wait for it. Wait for element. So I think I have to do something like this. I'm going to double check the syntax in just a second. And that has to come from so long. Why does it take so long? Cool. All right. So I actually see all the elements that I want. So let's come back. So we'll have a look at what it looks like when we start the app itself. But my error says I haven't found the text because I haven't mocked the response. It's getting the real response from the API at the moment. So let's have a look. If I try and run the app, let's do it again. Start. Did I just go to task view? How did I go to task view? It opens up task view. Okay. Oh, I see what's happening. App, let's render. Let's actually import it so we can actually see what's happening. Import, I guess we go use summary and then into headlines, import headlines, headlines from new summary, headlines, headlines, and then we have to go cool. All right. Look, Burberry launches £90 coronavirus face mask. What on earth is going on? Pitiful payments for coronavirus self-isolation. All right, this is the garden for you. There we are. Let's just ignore the actual headline. Okay, so looks like it's working as expected, and I need to make sure my test works now. So in my test, I've managed to make the get by text wait for the element to be here first. So clearly in the render, it's going through the component did mount, making a request, coming back, and I want to wait for that to happen before I then get text. Execute the get by text. So I've indicated to Jess, it's an asynchronous test, and then I use testing libraries React wait for element to make sure it's there first. So I can get rid of this. Now, what I need to do is mock fetch and return the mock response JSON. So this is a little bit fiddly, and I'll do it the fiddly way first, and then there's a package that we can use to make it a little bit easier. So what I need to do is mock fetch, and then as a result, stub a couple promises that happen. Because the fetch returns a promise, then this returns a promise, and then this resolves it in an update state. So this is I'm gonna have to maybe look this up. I think from memory, it does something like this. I'll leave it here. So I need to import my response first. Let's go mock response from, I guess we go into the mocks directory and we get Guardian response like this. And then we have to go do something like, what's the context? It's just going to be the window, right? So I think we do global ingest, and then specify the method that we're using. I think it's global because I'm not specifying anywhere. It's just fetch. Yeah, it's just global to us. And something clues we can't remember. Just spy on. Did I include any? I think I usually include it in the documents. Where is it? Mock implementation. We need to mock its implementation. Mock implementation. Yes, we do something like this. Okay, yes. So I guess we're going to return a promise that resolves and then does okay, returns an object that has the JSON property that is actually an anonymous function that returns another promise that, I guess, then just gives us the mock response. Cool, did it pass? It looks like it passed. Let's double check that. Screen.debug. Guess if I just do like this, it should fail. So when I get all of them, I should have at least one random test response. Cool, all right. So I guess that's how you do it fiddly-wise. A test response, let's go back as we just figured out. And the error message. What was the error message? There was no error message, just each try. Yes, okay, fine. Let's add in item and what's the index? Just to stop pissing React off. I guess it should be in the paragraph. Maybe.
Just quickly, Edward.
Yeah.
Just when you're setting up like the on the tests, that kind of like mock implementation, are you effectively just doing like the returning of the promise to resolve is like each stage of that like dot then?
Exactly. Exactly. It has to replicate exactly. So what I'm doing is fetch will always return a promise because it's a synchronous call, and so as a result, my mock has to do the same thing because in my source code I then call then. So if I haven't returned a promise from the first mock, then this will fail. It'll be like something like undefined. So because I fetch returns a promise and then this returns a promise, this is when I actually then execute. So I just need to mock twice, and that's why here I say when I call fetch, mock its implementation to return a promise, which then resolves and returns a promise. Specifically, that I have to make sure it has a JSON function because that's what happens there. Right. That's the part that unwraps it from the data that comes from the API, which is in JSON, and unwraps it so it's readable as JavaScript.
Perfect, thanks.
I think this part will always need to be here at the moment, but I think there might be packages that help clean this up a little bit because this is a little bit fiddly to keep doing. But as long as you understand the idea behind this, which I think is good to focus on, which is you just need to mock each stage as you've probably been used to in JavaScript or in Ruby. Anything that you do in your source code, you just need to replicate in your test code, trying to make it as simple as possible. And there are a few different ways to do this, but if we all just focus on doing it in one way for the moment, then we can then have a look at different ways to do it. But yeah, essentially that's it. I wrote a very simple test to render headlines and then make sure I have stubbed the response, and I stored the response here. And this is usually a common pattern that you'll just store snippets of JSON or whatever is returned from the API. You want to just store it, save it, either do a manual API call or just build up your own from scratch and keep it simple. There's a lot in here. I don't actually need everything. I could just cut out most of it and just have one item in here. I don't use anything else, but it's always good to be as close as possible to the real response because sometimes the response might change or you might want to add more functionality later. So there's the common pattern. You store your response and then you can mock it in your test. Any other thoughts or questions at the moment about, let me have those two side by side split, great.
I do want to ask the promise.resolve. That is just what Jess came in with, that resolve thing, right?
And this is Jest here. It's Jest by mock interpretation. And promise. Yeah, this is straight up JavaScript. You can return new promises.
Mm-hmm. And also earlier on, when you how did you realize that you have to use the wait for element part when you do the async await and the screen didn't get the I am a test object? How do you know that?
Yeah, great question. I just remember having done it before. And the thing that triggered me remembering that I need to do something like this is because even with using async await, it wasn't waiting. Mm-hmm. So I realized I had to make sure I specify. And the only thing that made sense in my head at the moment was because we're using testing library, React testing library, it was to make sure we use this method. But I haven't done this in a little while. So it was actually lucky that it worked rather than having to look through the documentation. But I'll have a look through the documentation as well to just double check.
Cool.
Hey, could I just explain a bit more about what's happening on line 11 of the headlines.js and within the fetch method? Because we're using the data to set the state with the kind of package JSON data.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So this line here, or this, when we call fetch, so let's have a look at this. If I grab this, so if I just call fetch using the same URL, I get this thing called a promise. And JavaScript does this to be asynchronous. So it makes a request and returns an object straight away, but the object is not the thing that you need. At some point, it will resolve once the function has been executed, or the callback function. So fetch is a wrapper around sending request objects to different servers. So that's why when you call the method fetch, it will straight away return a promise and wait for things to happen. So in order to make sure, almost like to make it synchronous, we only want to then do the next part when it resolves. We can use the method then. So the first thing that we need to do is find a way to parse it, because the information that we've got back is not in the right format. So it's known in JSON. So the first thing that we do is call then, and let's just have a look at it. So we always pass in like an argument, and this essentially just takes a function, and the ES6 way, or the sort of arrow syntax is by specifying it like that. But when it's in line, you actually don't need a lot of the brackets to make it readable. So all you need to do is say, like, I don't know, let's call it response. Let's just have a look at what this is at the moment. This was probably not going to give us that much. Let's have a look. So this gives us something that's happened. Once I've got the promise, I then have a look at, well, let's log it, and this is what we get. Still not enough, because I want to actually parse it. So rather than just doing console.res, let's do res JSON. And here we get two things. We get the promise that resolve, or that happens from when we call fetch, and then we actually console log the response by calling JSON. And we know that it returns its own JSON, because that's what happens here. So then we need to then chain one more then to say, well, then actually use this information. And once you've finished parsing it, then let's log it. So let's do one more. And so rather than log it here, so this does the parsing stuff that we need. And how many brackets have I got? I need to get rid of one, don't I? 1, 2, 3. No, 1, 2, 3. Something like that. I think it's 3. Looks confusing. And then I take whatever it is, and then let's console log that. And then we get the response back, which has what we want. So the difficult thing here, not necessarily the difficult thing, but the thing to remember is that making sure we understand when things return a promise, that we need to then use their methods to wait for it to resolve, and then we can chain more functions on that point. So fetch returns a promise, and then the JSON function returns a promise. That's what we need to do then, and then one more time, and then we can have access to the data.
Yeah.
So if we have a look here, I need to parse it, which returns I need to fetch it, which returns a promise. Then when that data resolves, or then the promise resolves, I need to then parse it. And when that resolves, I then have access to it and can manipulate it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I see. Yeah. I think I was confused about how the different thens related to each other, but I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially, this is the result of that.
Yeah.
And this is the result of this.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's something that we just have to spend time with, promises, and then when they resolve, especially coming from Ruby, when things are very synchronous in order, sometimes it takes a little bit of getting used to thinking about when methods return, they don't return what we think we want them to return, they return a promise, and you have to wait for that to happen. But just play around with it. So hopefully this morning we can do a bunch of that together. That's a really great question. I'm sure there's going to be more questions about that. So let's spend a few more minutes. Like, what are the thoughts or questions that we can go through?
This might be like a little bit kind of slightly separate topic, but
yeah.
In terms of like using fetch and then .then, can you make that into like an async await function as well? Is there like the ability to do that with React?
Yeah, it's just JavaScript, so you can async await it. Yeah.
Cool.
One thing I've run into in this, and I still haven't been able to resolve in a Rails project, is if there is no response, it produces that nil value thing. So is there something in here already inbuilt that I'm missing that kind of doesn't crash it if there isn't a result?
Yes. So in the fetch response, you would then make sure you would have error conditions if it weren't successful, or if it's on error, if it's on success. I haven't done that at the moment because I want to keep it super simple.
Yeah.
But yes, you're absolutely right. As a result of the fetch, then you say only when it's successful do this thing, or when it's not successful do this other thing.
Yeah, because I'm like, that's what I'm super interested in, because I still haven't been able to resolve it in Ruby. I've done like pluck and all these different things, and kind of if empty or if not empty, or and it's always works fine locally, but not on deploy. Heroku doesn't like, and it says it's a nil object and stuff. So I'm really fascinated to learn how you do it here.
Cool. So maybe we could have a look at that on Wednesday. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions at the moment? Cool. I'm sure things will come up. I'm going to share. I'll share the snippets of code in the Slack channel. What I want everyone to do now is essentially do the same thing. what you're looking at is the kind of thing that you should be aiming for. But in here, you'll have to do a couple more things to make sure, because you won't be using this API, I want you to use the GitHub API. So the first thing to do would be to go through using the GitHub API. So play around with it on your command line, figure out how to make a request to it successfully. And the GitHub docs will give you a lot of information about how to do it. I gave a simple example using curl and using fetch here. In the same way, Tim, that we have to parse it and then we can log it. So we'll go to two promises that we have to resolve. So what you should be able to get once you've successfully authenticated yourself, so you'll need to use curl with a couple of different headers, authorization with a token, you have to create a personal access token, and then you've got to specify, you don't have to, but you should specify that we're using the version 3 of their API. And if you make it successful, you should be able to get this response that has your information rather than my information. And you try doing the same thing both with curl and then also with fetch, and this you can do in your browser. For this, you have to make sure that you set up your personal access token and write it down somewhere, because GitHub won't store it for you. It will just store the key, but not the information. Cool, so do this first, and then go through the same process that I went through. Write a simple test, and store the information here in a file, and see how far you get. And the time is now 11:09, so let's do halfway. Let's meet at like 12:50. Let's make it 12:15 maybe, around 12:15 for a quick check-in, see how things are, and then we'll wrap up at 1 o'clock. Sound good? Awesome. All right, I'm going to stop recording.